Hello, Year 4. We're looking this week still at decimals, and our second lesson is how I can read and write decimals with up to 2 decimal places. And what this means is that any number that we have 2 decimal places, we know how to say, and if someone was to say it to us, we can write it down ourselves. Okay, so what we need to be able to do is to convert from a place value grid like this with counters into what's in each of the columns and therefore what the whole number is. Now there's some classic mistakes that people make which then actually makes their life slightly harder further on down the line. So we're going to go through those and then we can have a go and I'll go through the answers with you. So the first one here is we're going to look in the ones, tenths and hundredths column and fill in those details for us. So the first one, we're looking here in the ones column, we can see there is nothing. So we can put a 0 in our ones column. Now we've got here 3, which means we've got 3 in the tenths column. And again, we count how many we have in the hundredths column. 5, and that goes in there. So we have 0 ones, 3 tenths, and 5 hundredths. Hopefully we're getting to the stage now where quite obviously you can put these together. One thing you need to remember is the decimal point always comes after the ones. So let's put that in. Here's our ones column, goes in there, 0, put our decimal point in, and then we have 3 tenths and 5 hundredths. And there's our answer. Remember, if we were to say this number, we would say 0.35, not, as some people say, 0.35. The problem with this is that sometimes that can get confusing as to the value of it. Because if I was to say 0.35 and 0.4, some people might get confused as they are thinking 35 is larger than 4. We'll talk about that more in the next lesson. Have a go at the next 2 questions down here and see if you can do them. Okay, so hopefully you've had a go at those and we can move forward. First thing we need to do is we look into each column. Look in the ones column, we have 3. 3 goes in here. Decimal point always stays where it's going to be. We put the decimal point. Look in the tenths column next, we have 2. We put 2 in, and we have 5 again in the hundredths column. So we put 5 in there. Our number is 3.25. Moving on to the next one here. How many do we have in the ones column is nothing. Remember, we might need that. How many do we have in the tenths column? We've got 5. And how many do we have in the hundredths column? It's 4. So our number is 0.54. Hope you went okay. Okay, the next step we're going to look at is identifying the value of a digit within a whole number. So what we have here are 3 examples of a question where we're trying to look at what the digit 3 is worth in each of these different examples and see if they're different or the same. Have a go and then we'll talk through the answers. So what we're looking at here is trying to find out where the digit is in each of the different places. So first off, we have to identify where the 3 is in each of the numbers. So we can do that before we write anything down on our answer sheet. The first one, we're looking at the 3 here, and that's the 3 here. And then we look what column it's in and what there are. So we have, for number 1, our answer would be 3 tenths. The second one, we move down here. There's the 3 in our number. There's the 3 in our place value grid. And once again, the answer is 3 tenths. The second one over here, the third one, sorry, is here. We've got 3 here and 3 here. So our answer to number 3 is going to be 3, and then the column that 3 comes in, which in this case is our hundredths. So the value of that particular 3 is 3 hundredths. So our answer would be that. Now what's really important is that we know our place value grid, because actually that's what's going to give us our answers for all of these and going to make our life a lot easier when we're moving forwards. We're always going to know the value of each of the digits within our number itself. There's one more thing that we need to talk about when talking about reading and writing decimal points. And actually, this is probably the biggest thing when we're writing decimals. And that's putting 0 in as a placeholder. Now, you've done this when you're thinking about bigger numbers up to 100 and that sort of thing, putting a 0 into the columns that don't have anything in. And this is massively important when looking at decimals as well, because if we don't put that place value, the placeholder in, it actually can lose the value of that number. So for example, if I was to look at our first example here, I have 2 in the ones column, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the hundreds column. If I was to write it down like this, put my decimal point in, but forgot to put that 0 in, the number would read 2.7, which is very, very different from 2 and 700s. So in this case, there's a few tricks to remember. The first thing is there must always be something in your ones column. If there isn't something in the ones column, there needs to be a 0. No matter the number, whether the number is bigger than the ones column, or whether the number is lower than the ones column, there must always be something in your ones column. This is your point of reference. It tells you where the number starts. The decimal point helps so that whether it's a lower number than 0, or whether a lower number than 1, or a higher number. Now, in this case, because we've got a digit that is afterwards, this is our second rule, we need to make sure that any significant figures, which means any column that has a number in it, we make sure that any columns that are between the ones column and that column are filled in. Whether that is with nothing or whether it is with a digit depends on what the number is. But as long as we have a significant figure which is anything other than a 0, we need to fill in the missing gaps. So in this case, we need a placeholder here, which is our 0, in order to show that this is in the hundreds column rather than the tenths column. Try on the others. See what answers you come up with, and then we'll go through it on here. Have a go and see how you do. Okay, so let's have a look at these other 3 that we've got here and see whether or not we need placeholders or whether we don't. The second one we're looking at here has a 3 in the tenths column and has 5 in the hundreds column. So there's our number there. We need to make sure there's a decimal point here. Now in this case, our first rule comes up. Our first rule is there must always be something in the ones column. So what we put in the ones column must always be there. So in that case, a 0. So our number reads 0.35. Our next one, we look over and we can see there's 3 in the tenths column. We put 3 in the tenths column. Put the decimal point in, and then we go back to our rules. Our first rule is there must always be something in the ones column. So we put our 0 in. Our second rule states that there must be something in any columns between the ones column and the last significant figure. Our last significant figure here is in the tenths column, which means there's nothing beyond it, which means we don't need anything here in the hundreds column. We could put a 0, but it would make no difference because it actually doesn't affect the value of the number. Our very last one we have here, we follow the rules again. In our ones column, we have a 3. Make sure our decimal point goes in there. And in our hundreds column, we've got 5. Then we're looking at our first rule, which is something in the ones column. We've already got something there, so that's good. Our second rule is that we must put 0s in between our ones column and our column with the last significant figure. So here's a column, this has got a last figure, there's one column in between, we must fill it in with placeholder 0, in it goes, and our number is 3.05. Here are some questions. Have a go, post your answers onto Tapestry, and remember your placeholders Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next lesson.